So you have to keep at it, and you will suck in the beginning. And just that drive to become better at the process, I think for me, that is a huge motivator. So really trying to look ahead at what's coming at me and how can I best handle it, and what knowledge or what skills do I need to handle that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Ramses.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I was wondering, maybe let's start with your ADHD, because you say because you say you have ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's been a struggle for you to learn for probably the first 2 decades of your life or something, until something changed. The question is, what changed?
I don't know if it's a struggle per se. Like I just have many interests, and I always had many interests. And I think until I went to college, it was just everything was very unstructured. So I was just reading, and I was never taking notes or anything. Um, but nobody taught me how to learn really. So I think that is just the biggest challenge I always had, even in high school. Like nobody told you, oh, this is how you learn for tests, or this is how you can remember more. But then I entered a Spanish language and culture program in college, and obviously you have to learn because you have to speak a language, you have to learn a language. And soon I noticed, okay, just reading and rereading my technique approach until then wasn't working, wasn't making me learn Spanish. And then I thought, oh, I will just listen. I would just listen, nothing else. That wasn't help. Well, it was helping somewhat, but not wasn't making me conversationally fluent. Although it did help, but I needed more. So that's actually when I started to go out and look for learning advice and see, okay, what works? How does the brain work? Um, and then with my ADHD, like I don't see it as a problem, because when I'm interested in something, I enter hyper focus. So I can study for, I don't know, 8, 9 hours just straight, and I forget everything. I forget to get water, to go to the toilet, until like hours later, I'm like with pain in my blood. I'm thinking, why do I feel so bad? Oh, I have to drink some water. I have to eat something, or I have to go to the toilet. So yeah, I think that is the biggest challenge I've had. But now I don't see it as something negative per se. Um, it's I found so many ways to guide my attention and to program my attention that now I'm okay with it. Now my problem is more, okay, I have too many interests, and
Yeah.
how can I channel that? I think that's more of a challenge for me now.
Well, let's talk about that. How do you like channel your energy, your interests? How do you focus?
Yeah. So I have this concept that I call the professional learner, because when I started to look at my career a few years ago and look back and how I was able to do everything, it was always learning. That was the central theme. So, like, officially, I'm a knowledge worker. So I've been in consulting, I've been in account management, I've done product management, and it's all about organizing, capturing knowledge, and making sure that other people understand it. So, for example, if you're working in a product organization, you have to train people in new features, for example. Um, so, when it comes to the professional learner thing, I always look ahead. Okay, what is coming up in my job? What challenges am I going to face? It's not always possible, but for example, just take a very concrete example. 2 jobs ago, I'd switched to a quite technical role. I'd been in sales all those years, and I became a technical onboarding specialist. So I had to help uh, our clients on board. But then the product team decided, okay, we're going to add an API so people can connect to our platform. For me, like I knew what an API was, but I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know how it worked, the technology, nothing. So I had to really learn quickly, how does an API work? How do you talk to developers about an API? How do you explain it? What does API documentation look like? I had to write the documentation without ever having written any technical documentation before. So that's why I set out, did some courses on my own, like in my free hours. If I had time at work, I would just learn, document, take notes, write. And that's actually how I approach like learning projects to make sure, okay, I have this challenge coming up in my job, and now it's up to me to come up to get up to speed. So really trying to look ahead at what's coming at me and how can I best handle it, and what knowledge or what skills do I need to handle that.
And it seems like you've developed sort of a meta skill, learning how to learn, which
Yeah.
not everyone does. So can you
Mhm.
maybe talk about that a bit and how you've developed it?
Yes, because obviously when you're a knowledge worker, you have to learn so much. It's not just, oh, I am going to work with programmers and I need to know what an API is and I need to explain it. Sometimes it's very simple. It's something like, we're going to use a new system. How am I going to use this new system? Could be just an HR system. Could be even be Photoshop. Hey, you have a new responsibility. Now you have to create something in Photoshop. How do you do that? And I think the core skill for knowledge workers, it's you cannot rely on things like your Excel spreadsheet skills for the rest of your life, or just you have mad PowerPoint skills, just a few apps you need to know in your career, and you're good to go, and you can just go along slowly learning. No, you have to quickly learn, and it can also be something very complex, like you have to run a new project and you have to understand all these different moving parts. And I think if you are aware of how your brain learns, you can hack into that. So instead of um, just take one principle of learning, it's space out your practice. It makes learning deeper instead of mass practice where you just drill. But most people, the natural instinct, like the intuition, tells them, if I just cram, I know it right now and it feels like I know it, so this is working. So a lot of things that feel good for learning are very are like intuitively feel good, aren't really good. So I think if you are aware of how your brain works, of how it learns, if you know, oh, I don't need 5 hours now to study, I've just bought a course and I need 5 hours now to study. No, just set aside 20-30 minutes every morning, and then you learn better. So maybe you can spend less time on the course. And I think if people realize that, if they become aware of that, of how they learn, and there are just a few principles that apply to almost everyone, because learning styles, it has already been debunked that like some people only learn with audio, or can only learn by doing. You need all the different uh, sub skills to learn. And if you know how to do that, if you know how to hack into that, you can learn so much so quickly that it. I think people underestimate the possibilities there are in this information age, if you know how to learn, and you can just learn new digital skills quickly.
Can you give us another couple of those I guess meta skills or things to know, right? One thing you just said is like space out your learning. What are another couple of
Hmm.
things for like someone that's maybe new to learning, or someone that's maybe
Hmm.
struggling with learning, this is like, here are 3 things or 5 things. If you do them, you're going to learn much better.
I'm actually writing a Twitter thread about which I'm going to call the 7 principles of highly effective learners. Just let me get it quickly. Yeah, so the 7 habits of highly effective learners. It what I see now is there are 7, and I will mention them, and then we can go
Let's do it.
into them
Let's do it.
quickly. So as the first one, I have generation. So it means instead of first seeing a problem and then learning the answer and then memorizing that answer, you see a problem and then you try to figure it out on your own, even when you don't have any tools yet to get to it. So it could be an automation problem, but you don't even know how to code yet. So you force yourself to think, how would you solve this if you were a programmer? And then there's interleaving. So for example, if you have different things you want to learn, could be something very specific, video editing. If you want to become better at transitions, better at clip transitions, you can try to, and I talked about it before, that it would be mass practice if you say, okay, I'm going to practice creating 100 video transitions in a row. But if you just added one clip in its entirety, you do a clip transition, then maybe somewhere you cut out a little bit, somewhere else you clean up the audio, and then again, oh, I have to do another clip transition. So you interleave it with other little skills you have to do, and it's more effortful. And because it's more effortful, because you forget a little bit how you did it, even though it's just a few seconds ago. Or if you go back to video editing after a few days break, you will notice, hey, it feels a little bit more effortful, but after a few times, I'm actually better at it. So this time, and again, it also has to do with spaced repetition. This time allows for some forgetting, and the extra effort that comes in causes better learning. Then there is obviously spaced repetition that has to do with it. So you don't just interleave different topics, but you also space them out in time. There's elaboration. So for example, you learn something, you learn an idea. It's so easy to just accept it and to tell yourself, oh, I know this idea. But if you force yourself to explain it, and I prefer writing, if you force yourself to explain it and elaborate on it, so what other ideas are connected, you will better remember and understand the idea. Feedback is also very important. So if you are elaborating on an idea, if you're trying to make sense of an idea, and again, something very concrete could be, for example, a programming paradigm. So you're used to one programming paradigm, and now you're going to switching to functional programming, and you're trying to make sense of what it means. So you explain it to yourself, and a feedback component could be that you show your explanation to either your teacher, but you can also just publish it in public on Twitter, and then people who know more about the subject, they can correct you. They can say, hey, you have misinterpreted this, or you are making a mental shortcut here, because you need to always keep this in mind. Also has to do with reflection. So if you elaborate on something, and then I like to keep also kind of a journal. So I explain ideas to myself. Mm-hmm. Then I try something out. Mm-hmm. And then I reflect on how well did it go. So reflection is very important. So you describe to yourself what you did and what the result was. And it's almost like the scientific method. So you come up with an hypothesis, for example, oh, if I do this, it's like maybe come back to the video editing. If I do these 5 clicks, then I have the transition that I want. But then you reflect on it and you say, it takes 30 seconds, those 5 clicks, and I keep forgetting them. Isn't there an easier way? Can I do a script, for example, or can I record the sequence of clicks? So you're always looking for something to do it better. Retrieval, that is the final principle, I would say. And retrieval, it's really making your learning active. So you can say, I'm creating flashcards, for example, if you want to have some very specific knowledge, and you should make flashcards in a way that challenge you. So instead of making it easy on yourself and that you can just think, oh yeah, this is the answer, make it, for example, that you have to supply the answer. So instead of just writing down the answer on the backside, maybe have a closed deletion. So you leave out part of the crucial part of an explanation, and then you have to supply that crucial part of the explanation. So those are a few ways you can challenge yourself. And I think it basically, if you want to have just a few principles to condense it down to, it's make learning active. So challenge yourself. Try before you learn it. So that's like the generation. And then space out your practice over time. So make it active, challenge yourself, make it effortful, and then what also makes it effortful is if you space it out and if you interleave it with different topics. I hope I make sense, because for me these principles are so logical and they've been with me for so many years. I
Yeah.
hope they make sense when I explain them.
No, I think it makes total sense. I'm, aware of them as well. But if not, people, you can tweet at us, email us, let us know if this, doesn't make sense, and we'll be happy, Ramses especially, to explain. So one thing that really shines through here is your love for learning. It really comes across.
Oh, really? That's good
Yeah,
to know.
it
That's good to
really
know.
does. It really does. And then my question would be like, how do you get that love for learning? And then the follow-up question is like, for a lot of people that maybe didn't have, your circumstances growing up, or maybe don't have your quote unquote intrinsic love for learning. I don't know what you say your learning is intrinsic, the love for learning, or maybe it's a cultivated habit, but how do we cultivate this love for learning in people in general?
For me, I feel like it has always been there. And I think, so to come back to what you started with, ADHD, I see it as an asset, because for me, that I think that causes my love for learning to a large extent, because I have so many interests and I just want to understand it. So I see something and I think, wow, I want to know more about it. Hey, there's a 10-part Netflix series, documentary series about this topic. Yes. And I will be watching it and I will be taking notes. However, in high school, when my teacher told me, oh, you have to take French. And I was like, what? I don't want to learn French. I have no use for it. So, yeah, I think, and I did horrible at French in high school. So, that's also why it's ironic when I told my family, hey, I'm enrolling in a Spanish language program. And they were like, but you hated French. I said, yes, I hated French. I don't hate Spanish. It's more exotic. So I always like the exotic. So for me, it was really like the motivation, and visualization has been a very important component, for example, to learn Spanish, because I was enrolled in a 4-year program, which also included, teaching methodology, because it wasn't just Spanish. But I enrolled in it for Spanish, so I could endure all the other classes, like the psychology classes, which I wasn't particularly interested in back then, as again, a, like a way or a path to me being able to become a teacher and teach this awesome language. So visualization, it was for me really, okay, I picture myself living in Spain. That became a reality. I pictured myself in front of a class and be engaged with students, and my students thinking, wow, okay, I love this language. How is it possible that I love this language? So I was always keeping that in mind. So visualization is also was very important for me. But I think that the most important factor in the end was developing a love for the process, because it's so easy to obsess over the results. Um, but for example, learning a language or learning a hard skill, for example, programming or any other knowledge skill, video editing, um, even just note taking or learning, taking good notes, it's an art.
Mm.
So you have to keep at it, and you will suck in the beginning. And just that drive to become better at the process, I think for me, that is a huge motivator. But then obviously also the skill I'm learning, I need to have a use for it. So I started with Python a few years ago, and I was dabbling a little bit with it, but it wasn't until I gained new responsibilities and I had to do more data analysis that it really became useful for me. And then I became more motivated to actually learn the damn language and learn to use it instead of thinking, oh, I will do a tutorial.
Mm.
If you have something specific you have to solve, if you have 2 weeks to deliver on a bunch of reports, you will learn really quickly. So yeah, that has always been a motivator for me, just looking at the result,
Mm.
being very aware of it, visualizing it, but at the same time really falling in love with the process, because if I don't fall in love with the process, it's done. I'm not going
Mm.
to do it,
Mm.
because the drive just for the result on its own, it's not enough.
Yeah.
It's not enough for me, at least.
Yeah. I personally don't have kids, but I've heard from a bunch of friends who have kids that during this, pandemic, Zoom based, basically Zoom based classes, most people were, stuck at home. Kids were doing classes over Zoom. That it was really the kids that were interested in the subject to begin with, they were flourishing, and the kids that didn't care to begin with, they were just totally lost. Which just kind of goes to show that online learning can be fantastic for people that are engaged, but can also be pretty much useless for people that don't care. And this is something I've been
Oh yeah.
thinking about a lot, because
Hmm.
obviously to get great education, online education into the hands of millions, ideally billions of people, we need this to. I mean, online education is scalable, but basically the question is, how do we scale this intrinsic thirst for knowledge and this yearning for for learning and for getting better, because a lot of people just don't seem to care, frankly.
Mm. You know, it's I always say so I write a lot, and I often joke I don't like to write, but I'd like to have written. And I think most people are like that. They want the results without putting in the work. And what you also mentioned, so learning via Zoom, especially for kids, is very difficult. And I think there are also some needs that are unmet, especially when you're a small kid. You need to play, and you need to play face to face. You need the social interaction. But then also Zoom, learning via Zoom, it's more challenging. It's if you have a question, if you don't know the answer, it's way more difficult to ask help or to be noticed. And many people will give up. And lately, I've been really diving into the research of growth mindset. And I think if you have a growth mindset, which means you enjoy the challenges that come with learning, and you don't see it as a problem, and you don't mind looking like a fool, you think, oh, good, a challenge. You become motivated by the challenge itself. So you become motivated by the process. Whereas if you have a fixed mindset and you think, I should know this, and then you don't know it, and you don't want to look like a fool. I think it's also much easier to fall through the cracks if you have the kind of mindset and you are alone on mute in a Zoom call with your teacher and 10 other people. Um, I think that the fixed mindset people will be happy that they can get away with um, not having to show if they can or cannot do something, because at least they won't look like a fool. Whereas the people with a growth mindset, they will think, oh, this is a new challenge, this is a new circumstance. And so I think it's a nuance, it's a complex answer. It's not that if you are interested in something, that's the whole story. Because I think if you believe that if you believe you can grow, if you believe that challenge is part of the deal to gain a skill, you'll be fired up when you encounter a challenge, because you will see, or you will think, this is the moment I'm learning. I'm having a challenge now I'm learning. Whereas someone with a fixed mindset will think, I have now I'm walking against a challenge, I will just abandon the task. I'm not going even to try. And then my teacher will ask me why I haven't done the homework, and I would just say, oh, I forgot. So it's
Let me
easier, I think.
let me give you a little pushback on this though.
Sure.
Yeah. So what about if, your mom is working, two jobs, you have five siblings, your dad is, I don't know, in a rough situation. You don't have any,
Yeah.
role models around you. You don't have, people showing you,
Hmm.
a growth mindset. How do
Yep.
you develop a growth mindset in that situation?
It's very difficult.
Mm,
It's a real challenge, and it absolutely has to do also with how you grow up. So I didn't have that environment until later in high school. So I grew up in I would say a dysfunctional family. So my
mm,
mom died pretty young. My dad couldn't really handle it. So I was that kid. I was before high school and even in high school. I wasn't. A, I was surviving, I would say, when it comes to my marks, to my grades. So I had to work really hard. And my dad would just ask, have you done your homework? He wouldn't sit down with me. He wouldn't, even though he was perfectly capable of learning, but he has
mm,
had his own shit to deal with. So yes, I've been in that situation. And I think that's also one reason why it wasn't until college when I said, "Oh, I'm struggling with learning." And teacher said, dude, let's see what we can do to help you. And that was the first time that a teacher told me, okay, man, I'm going to help you. And let's find a way. And I think that also made me so much more motivated
mm,
to become a teacher myself. And once I started to teach, that I became more of a coach, and I was always interested in the meta skills, because most of my colleagues, they were like, oh, these students, they are horrible at Spanish. I'm like, they're not horrible at Spanish, they just don't know how to acquire a language. If we first help them set a mindset, make them believe in themselves and in their capabilities. And I always started, you already have the tools to learn Spanish. You're already okay. And people are like, why? We haven't demonstrated anything. It's like, well, you speak your native language. And they're like, yeah, 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 sure, whatever. It's like, no, it's true. You speak one language. Like, you're not, your brain is ready for language. It's not like you have a disability or anything. You can speak a native language, and heck, you can speak really good English as well, because many young people in the Netherlands speak a good English. And you would just see people like, oh shit, he's right. And that did so much. Just that little joke almost helped many people, because they
mm,
thought, oh, that is cool. Or I would tell my own story. I would say, I grew up like this, and I spoke English like this. I would overdo it in front of the class until I learned how to properly learn languages. And this is how I started out speaking Spanish. And I didn't know Spanish 3 years ago. And here I am teaching you Spanish. And they were like, oh, this is possible. So I think teachers play a very important role as well. But it always starts with the parents. And yeah, it's very difficult. It hurts me when I see kids who say, I cannot do this and give up, because I was that kid as well.
Mm.
Um, it's tough. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, sadly, when it comes to role models and also to mental health, by the way, um, as of 2021, the internet can only do so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I yeah, I think there is definitely a place for just looking each other in the eye, um, and especially when it comes to I think to group learning in companies. So to get to group learning. Um, so I had a corporate job until September last year, and we were doing a huge group learning project because we were implementing a new ERP system, and we had to learn all the different ways of working that people were doing with all these different systems, and we had to consolidate it into one system. So we had to learn how people do their work, and then try to get to some coherent standard, and then implement that, and then teach people how to actually use that system. And once COVID hit, we we could still work because most of our work was already digital. So we would have like brainstorm sessions, and we would have like sprint planning in front of a board with post-its and everything. And that changed. So we switched to digital tools. But it was still different because we had to make tough decisions, system decisions. We had to disappoint people who had been asking overwhelmingly for certain features, and we couldn't deliver on them yet. So we had to find a way to communicate it also to management. And it's way easier to come to a decision when you're in the same room, where you can feel each other's energy. um and it's I think we are going to be able to learn better online, also in a group. But we are still in transition, and I think we really need to change our mindset and take more ownership ourselves. Because when you're in a meeting or in a brainstorm session, in just face to face, it's there's a different dynamic than there when there's an online discussion. But I think once you get used to it, or once you adapt your way of working. So for example, the Rome team, it's a distributed team, the Rome research team, and they have their meetings just by typing in a multiplayer database. So instead of talking to each other, they discuss things via text.
Yeah.
So I think that is not something common, but they are raving about it, and they are saying our thinking is so much clearer, our discussions are better, we come to better decisions. So I think once more people try to explore these new ways of communicating, and again, it's a learning process because you have to try something out, test it out, wait a little bit, get back to it. So again, it's like interleaving. It's like you elaborate on it, you gather feedback. So this in itself, finding a good way to work with your team, it's a learning process in itself. So you have to plan, you have to reflect, you have to gather feedback. It there's so many ways that learning can help people and teams, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I still don't know whether we're going to be, mostly remote in, over the next 5 to 10 years, or whether we're going to have like a hybrid, or whether a lot of people will be like, oh no, COVID is over now. Let's go back to how things were in 2019. It's going to be interesting.
Well, I mean, I don't go to shops anymore. Almost, I order everything online. I
Same.
know many people who were very fanatic in the beginning, like old former colleagues or former managers who told me in the past, "Oh, you cannot work from home. That's not. I need to be able to reach you." And now they've been working for a year from home,
Mm.
and they're telling me, "Man, I'm maybe going back to the office 1 or 2 days a week, not anything
Yeah.
more." And I think people are getting used to this, and there's still for certain conversations and certain decisions, I still think it's better to be face to face.
Mm.
For much work, I think it's a blessing also because it allows you to do more deep work, because personally in an office I cannot do deep work. Like even when I'm with my headphones on, people interrupt me. They're like, "Oh, quick question." There are no quick questions because it's always difficult to get back to the task. So I I see so many possibilities that are not used yet,
Mm.
that I'm hopeful for where we can go. And I think as collaboration tools are getting better, and also online facilitation is getting better, because especially when you have online meetings, you need good facilitators. I
Mm.
think um, there there are companies that will say we are remote only, and there are already many companies doing that, and they're successful. They're
Mm.
very successful. So I don't know, but obviously there's always a place
Mm.
for face to face contact. Yeah, like always, it's complex.
Yeah, I know. I know. There's no like black or white
No.
answer. There really isn't. Let's talk more about language learning because I'm a language geek myself. And,
Hmm.
I learned, English, French, your your most favorite language. um, Also, so I grew up speaking Russian, but not that great, to be honest, because I was born and raised in Germany. So then I had to actually actively teach myself a lot of Russian to get to like the point where I could say, okay, I'm actually fluent in Russian. I was sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
just by, immersion, osmosis, I got to like a, medium sort of level. And then I had to also teach myself to get to a better level. So I have a fair amount of experience with language learning. So talk to me about how you learn Spanish and a couple of maybe skills, techniques, methods, strategies.
Mm. Yeah. Do you have 3 hours? I will try to condense it. I think many of the principles that I just mentioned before also come in play with language learning. How I learned Spanish was, so I first tried the grammar approach, just how college prescribed it. So you have the grammar, the verb conjugation tables, and you have the word lists and the textbooks and everything. And I did everything religiously. I was, oh my goodness, I was cramming those conjugation tables. It's horrible. But it didn't make me fluent. It didn't improve my understanding, which was scary for me, because I thought, okay, as long as I can at least can understand something, I will be more motivated. And it wasn't happening. So I stumbled upon All Japanese All the Time, which is a blog by this crazy Kenyan dude. He calls himself Katsumoto, and he taught himself Japanese in about 18 months without going to
Ooh.
classes, and he describes it on his blog. And it's essentially immersion as much as you can, so home immersion, by watching television, cartoons, movies, um, mostly stuff you already know, maybe in your native language. So for example, there are many movies I know by heart in English, and then in my case, I would just get the dubbed version in Spanish. So if you're learning a language that does dubbing, then you're set, because you will have access to so much engaging content that you already somewhat know, that it becomes a lot easier. And then next to it, I was very heavy on the flashcards. So I had on the front of the card, I had a sentence, always sentences. I had a sentence in Spanish. And then at the back of the card, I started out with the translation in Dutch. But as my language skills grew, I started to only do definitions of unknown words in Spanish on the backside. So I would see the sentence, I would say it out loud, and I would test myself. Okay, what does it mean? And then, well, I would turn the card. I used this flashcard program Anki, and like when I graduated, I think it had about 5,000 flashcards, that deck, and it was just sentences that I mined, so to say, from television, from movies, books, dictionaries. So I would just scribble down words that I saw repeatedly and just couldn't figure out the context, the meaning from the context. So I would write them down, and then I would get like 4 or 5 dictionary sentences, and then I would add those to my flashcard deck. And then obviously many of my classes were in Spanish, so I was just immersing myself as much as I could in the language, not giving myself a break. So getting up in the morning, my alarm clock would play Spanish rap music. I would be in the train, listen again to Spanish music while maybe reading like a comic book in Spanish. And then my classes were mostly in Spanish. And if I had days that I had no Spanish classes or no classes in Spanish, I would hang out as much as I could with my Spanish speaking, native Spanish speaking classmates instead of the Dutch guys. And so I had all these little hacks just to get more Spanish in my life. I even ended up going to Spanish church for a while, just to absorb it as much as I could, and get in contact with native speakers, because for me that was really motivating. I really like Latin American culture, and it's very diverse. So I discovered, oh, people from Venezuela are so different from Argentinians. So for me, it was like an adventure game almost. Like I get to learn these new foods, or these idioms, or these little expressions that people have. For me, that was just, it was one big game to always improve, to always learn something, to always add a new card to my space repetition system. It was really challenging myself and making it a game, and trying to ascend the my well the level of proficiency.
Hmm. Yeah, one thing I found with English and French, for instance, is that it's really hard to get from knowing zero French to maybe like an A2, B1 level, so a sort of intermediate level. And then all of a sudden, you're in a place where you can watch movies, you can read books. You'll maybe understand only 50%, but that's fine. Like you're at the, you're in this place where you're able to just consume native content. And that's huge, because then you can just, whatever you're into, whether it's, nature documentaries, or I don't know, cryptocurrency stuff, you can learn about that in that language. And that makes it so much easier. And yeah.
But I would say I started out with native content, and I would say everyone should start out with native content, because
for sure.
I hated my textbooks. And what you say, it's absolutely true, because at some point I was just getting fed up watching Toy Story for the 50th time, because I've watched Toy Story so many times in Spanish. But that's a movie I really liked as a kid, and I had warm fuzzy feelings watching that movie in Dutch, and I could just rewatch it. And there are some other movies that like Super Bad, for example. Have you ever watched that movie? It's horrible, but it's so funny. It's so quirky, and I had seen that movie so many times in English, so I couldn't see it anymore in English. But
Yeah.
then I watched it in Spanish. I was like, oh my goodness, it's even funnier in Spanish because there, to me, certain expressions, well, for a Spanish person, they're very normal, but to me, they sound very funny. So
Yeah.
that kept me motivated. Um, and there was one, at some point I grew impatient and I thought, I'm just going to watch Spanish shows, even though I don't understand them
Mm.
at all. And because, dubbing, it's cleaner, and especially, like I said, I already knew most of the content. But I remember I was watching this Spanish show, and at the end of the show, of the episode, I thought, "What the fuck?" I understood the entire story. It was as if someone had flipped on a light switch in my mind, and I realized in that moment, I was like, "I understand Spanish, native Spaniards. How is this possible?" So it was the first time I realized that I was I was proficient enough to keep up with full full speed Spaniards speaking as they speak. And that was another motivator for me. But I think you can get there pretty quickly because
Mm.
sometimes it's just a single phrase that you understand. And then it's like, oh, understood that phrase. So you have these little wins that I think are very motivating. At least they were for me.
Yeah. Oh, totally, totally. And I think I'm a huge fan of full immersion. And
Mm.
obviously, not a lot of people are in a position where they can, pull, like a Benny Lewis or like a Scott Young and just go like, 3 months or 6 months,
Oh
full
yeah.
immersion, doing it 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day. But that's definitely the most effective way of doing it. And
I don't know
you
because
don't know?
that
Oh,
is
let's hear this.
no. Oh my god. I've well with I know Benny personally,
Mm,
and we buried the hatchet many years ago. But we had well, he was way more successful always with this blog, but we had a little bit competing blogs when he just started
mm,
out, and I was running it with a friend of mine called Matt, and he taught himself French
mm,
up until very high level, and now he's tackling Korean, and we were
mm,
completely obsessed with this
mm,
input first method. And Benny said, "No, you just need 3 months." And we said that's completely unrealistic because how many people can move to the country?
yeah.
But then also, I think what he does, although it's great and he has a great life doing it, and power to him, but it's still mass practice. So you go to the country, you
Mm,
jam 3 months of learning, um, in one block, instead of spreading it out. So
mm.
if you spread out the same effort over 1 or 2 years, I think you would become more fluent than those guys in 3 months.
Oh, I
They will
actually
probably
agree.
say something else. They will say, "Oh, spreading it out too
Yeah.
much, it will uh, instill a fear of speaking in you," and nonsense like that.
No, no,
That's
no.
not my
I
experience.
agree. I agree with this. It's just like I found that the part of language learning that just sucks is to go from 0 to 1, to go from like I know
Oh
nothing
yeah.
to like I can
Oh,
kind of make
absolutely.
myself understood. That just sucks. And if
In
you can
that in
just
that sense,
yeah,
absolutely,
exactly.
absolutely. I think if you have like a ramp up period where you
Yeah,
go really hard and
yeah,
extreme,
yeah,
it could really help. Yeah, I've never considered that actually.
yeah.
To go really hardcore in the beginning, that you have
Yes.
like a foundational basis. That's an
This
interesting thought. I haven't
yeah.
really contemplated it.
Yeah. Because this is how I've always seen it. Because like basically we can have like
Mm.
a long discussion about this. I mean, we are, but like it's the whole like right. So let's just say okay, a person being fluent in a language is like B2 or maybe it's B1,
Hmm.
but it's definitely at B2. And and then the question is like how do I get there ASAP? Because getting there is like the sucky part. And once I'm
Yeah.
there, it's fun. And once I'm there, I can talk to people like in, I like about more than just the weather. I can actually have discussions. And And it's super fun. So in that sense, it's great to be like, okay, I'll take maybe actually the perfect, as far as your effort based approach, maybe actually the perfect, the MVP, if you will. Maybe it's 4 weeks, 4 weeks of total immersion,
Mhm.
and then it's like maybe it's an hour a day, and then if you do an hour a day
Mm.
every day after that initial whatever 4 week or 6 week on ramp, then probably within a
Yeah.
year you're going to be, again, depending on how skilled a language learner you are, because like obviously if I were to learn Spanish now, I could totally learn it in a couple months because I
Mm.
know French, I know English, I've learned multiple languages already.
Yeah.
So then probably for me, within a year, it's fair to say my Spanish would for sure be B2, if not higher.
Mm. Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah, that's fair.
yeah.
That's fair. And it reminds me of Josh Kaufman's the first 20 hours. He has written a book about
Yeah.
rapid skill acquisition. And I think so his approach is very close to just deconstructing a skill. So
Mm,
really identifying what are the different parts and then in what order should I learn them, and then recalibrate as you go along. So again,
mm,
gather feedback and then see, okay, what is my weak spot? And then maybe create a drill for it, and then drill that weak spot and then go on. So yeah, I think there's probably something to say for that. Although I only know one speed, so that's extreme. Sometimes people ask me, um, they explain their situation, and for example, they're moving to Taiwan, and they say, okay, in 6 months I'm going to move to Taiwan, but I only have 1 hour per day. How should I go at it? I'm like, 1 hour a day. I don't know how to make best use of 1 hour a day. If you told me you have 4 hours a day, I could tell you a little bit more, like 2 hours
mm,
of television
mm,
watching. Yeah, it's I'm maybe that's also my personality. I tend to go to extremes.
mm,
So I really like to get stuck in something and then get myself work hard to get myself out of it.
mm.
So yeah, I'm a little bit of extreme learner, I think, in that sense. But I like that approach to first go extreme and then like pull back a little bit on the
Mm,
intensity, so
mm.
you can build on that foundation. That's a very interesting concept. Yeah.
And then as a learner, you're also able to um, just have fun in that language. Like the person, right, that only has an hour a day
Hmm.
to learn Chinese. Um, maybe they're really into some sort of, I don't know, TV show, right? I'm sure there's a Chinese version of it somewhere.
Yeah.
And like if you go hard for whatever the first couple of months, you're able to watch that TV show and then it's fun. And then it's like you're watching
Mm.
that TV show anyways. You might as well watch it
Yeah.
in Chinese to have fun,
Yeah, that's really how I stuck to Spanish,
Hmm.
because in the end, for example, I remember just following some shows, and I was, instead of watching them on the Dutch television with subtitles in the original audio, I would wait until I could download the dubbed version somewhere, and I would just follow the shows in Spanish, because I was so used also to the, like their voices, that when I heard the original, I was like, oh, it sounds weird.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's a good point, that it just becomes normal for you. It's just a thing you do. So, oh, you're learning Spanish. Well, you just watch Spanish television. You don't even think about it. It's just there.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. For sure.
Mm.
I have one last maybe question to tackle, which is sales.
Mm.
So, because I know basically you started out as a teacher and then you ended up in sales and very
Yes.
successfully so, if I might ask, if I might
Yeah.
add. And then basically the question is like, as far as the learning
Mm.
is concerned, how do you become a good salesperson, basically?
Again, I was in the perfect situation, because yeah, I graduated in 2011, and there was still an economic crisis going on, budget cuts, and I couldn't find a full-time job as a teacher. So, and that's common in the Netherlands, that you work at 2 or 3 schools. I didn't want that, because I already have trouble keeping up with one student body, let alone 3. My goodness. So yeah, I talked to a friend. He said, "Oh, I think you would be a good salesperson. Like, you're energetic, and you like to teach things to people. So what about teaching someone a product, or how to solve a problem?" It's like, okay. So I ended up in a I ended up as a telemarketer. There's no other word to put it. I was essentially, for the first 2 years of my professional career after graduating, I was a telemarketer. So 8 hours a day, I would call IT managers to set appointments for my account manager colleagues. So and we were hired as a telemarketers. So it wasn't like I was working for one company. In the morning, I would be a telemarketer for Dell, and in the afternoon, I would be a telemarketer for HP, for example. And could be the same product. So in the morning, it's Dell servers, and in the afternoon, it's HP servers. So I had to learn different. We all had to learn different solutions, and it was really faking it until we were making it, because I knew something about IT, but I didn't know anything about IT infrastructure, or vendors, or distributors, or resellers, whatever. It was a completely unknown world for me, and that's where I really learned how to take good notes, because we had these briefings, like 4-hour briefings, about this project we were doing. So, for example, I would be calling for 10 days for Dell for a new type of server, and I had to understand, what is the problem that this new solution solves, and how can I recognize, what questions can I ask the people to discover, are they a fit, or to talk with my colleague, or not. And then, while I was having all these phone calls, I was always typing away. I was always taking notes. And then after each conversation, I had to turn those notes into a coherent piece that I could give to the account manager that was going to visit that that potential client. So for me, like, I already learned a little bit how to take notes during lectures, but in that 2-year period, I was just writing notes for almost 8 hours a day while I was on the phone. And I would ask a question, and if I had enough rapport, some guys could launch into a five minute answer, and I just had to write along. And I had to, so I was writing down stuff also that I didn't know anything about. So they would mention their specific technologies, or standards that they were using, or security standards. And they would be like, yeah, so currently we're upgrading our data center to this ISO certification. And I would be like, oh, really? What ISO certification? And they would mention it. It's like, oh, that's pretty strict. I had no fucking idea. But I would just write it down, and I would just look it up. And then, by writing those notes, and by trying to give an impression of the conversation that I had, I learned the skills that still help me. Because when I take notes now, for example, people tell me, how are you able to take these notes from a live lecture? Because, for example, sometimes I offer to take notes for live sessions, and I just directly after the session ends, I send them. And people are like, how is this possible? But that is exactly the practice I had. And again, it's learning. It's doing something for 8 hours a day for 2 years, refine it, listen back to recordings, so that's the feedback, take notes, try out questions to ask. So, for example, I would never have a script. I would only have a bunch of questions. I would do my intro. I would ask a few questions to gauge, okay, do they even have time for me? Are they even a little bit interested in this topic? And then I would do a short pitch, and then I would have a few more questions to qualify them, to see, okay, is there a real need, or are we just going to drink coffee and talk nonsense, or you with my colleague? So I became better at asking questions, and I became better at writing down those answers in a detailed but condensed form. And I think that's really where I learned how to take good notes
How do
and
you get
become.
yeah.
Sorry.
No, sorry. So how do you get them to not hang up on you just like that?
Oh yeah, that's difficult. It's I would say rapport, and it's always like, for me, I was always very aware there's a human on the other side. So once I I went further into sales and then made the transition to more technical roles. I was at the other side of the line, and like I was called by 5 people a day trying to sell me something or trying to get an appointment with me, just like I tried 5, 6 years before. But I could always hear in the tone of their voice that they were not really interested. They were just thinking of, oh, I need to just close this guy. I need to get an appointment with this guy. But I learned very quickly how to talk to people, because I would just write down, started with the pitch, doesn't work. And I would do that maybe 5 times in a row, and 4 out of 5 times, people would hang up on me when I was in the pitch, and it was like, okay, there's not enough rapport. They don't give me permission yet to take 30 seconds from their time to tell them why I'm calling. So in the end, I became really good at keeping it a little bit vague why I was calling, and then like 2-3 minutes in, people would ask, "Hey man, but we're having a cool conversation, but why are you calling?" Like, oh, okay, so glad you asked. And then I could do my pitch. So it was always trial and error. It was always treating them as humans, respecting their time, respecting the situation they were in. So, for example, if I called someone at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I knew he had been called so many times that day, because the average IT manager in the Netherlands, I don't know, they are called between 10 and maybe 15 times a day, just by telemarketers, just trying to sell them something or get an appointment. So I was very aware of that. And I think if you are, and you're very deliberate about your approach, and I was very deliberate at learning, I would reflect every day, and I would feel like shit if I didn't have an appointment. I would sit down with uh, like my manager, and he would be like, "Why do you take it so seriously?" He's like, "I failed today," and they're like, "You failed today? Man, we're at the beginning of the month. You have enough time to get up to speed." Like, no, 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 no. Today just was shit. And then I would try to reflect. I would try to talk with him about, okay, I did this, and this was the reaction I got. So always very deliberate in analyzing, what am I doing? What is the response, and how can I try something else? Again, it's a scientific method. It's form an hypothesis and test it.
And did you have the same sort of opener or hook to get people
No,
to? It
never.
was always different, always different.
Yeah, and it was even if at some point, you, like, when you call a company, you always end up with a receptionist. So you introduce yourself. In the Netherlands, is you introduce yourself with your name, the company you're calling from, and the person you're looking for, and then sometimes, why are you calling? And that moment already is very important. But at some moment, like your introduction, like, okay, this is Ramses Oudt from Dell speaking. How can I speak with this and this person? My manager would come in and smack the back of my head and say, "You are sounding like you've done this 100 times. You've said this 100 times today." I said, "But I have said this 100 times today." It's like, right, and now you're not getting connected. You will see. It's like, oh, and then it was like, oh yeah, the person is not available. And then I would hear 5 times in a row, the person is not available.
Mm.
even though I knew, like I had spoken to them in the morning,
Mm.
and they told me, oh, call me at 4, and then the receptionist wouldn't let me through, and I knew it has to do with my intonation. So it's always mixing it up and keeping it natural. And even though you're doing something 100 times, um, make it look natural. And that's really hard, I would say, in
Yes.
sales.
I'm asking because I've done this before and as well, and I would say I failed miserably at this.
Yeah, it's tough. Like I've seen people come in and leave literally crying after 3 days,
Mm.
and it was funny to see like the veterans in that company. Like there
Mm.
was one guy who had been there when I joined. He was already there for 2 years. He was just so good, and he was so slick. And I thought, how is this possible? And the guy said, oh man, I was a robot when I came in. I was sounding the same every time, but now it's like I keep it playful. Like I sometimes I don't like, you try something different every time to keep yourself
Mm.
on your toes, and you build in little challenges. So for example, at one time we had a sales coach who said, you guys are talking too much after you close, so you
Mm.
do the proposal for the appointment, and then you should shut up. And we were just doing little competitions
Mm.
about who can shut up the longest. And this one veteran guy, and we recorded some of our conversations. There was one instance, like he shut up for 30 seconds. I couldn't do it. I like, for me it's so difficult. I
Mm.
want to fill the silence. And that guy just had all these techniques. Like he would put it on mute, and he would put his little stress ball, and he would just smile deliberately. He's just like, hee hee. And I was like, why do you do that? It was good. And he said, that prevents me from interrupting them. Like it's on mute, I'm away from the phone, I cannot do anything. So it's up to them to respond first. It's like, wow, that's genius. But that comes with experience, but then also doing the same thing over and over again, that you
Mm.
just want to shake things up a little bit, and you have all these little tricks that you learn. So it's, again, it's practice, and it's active practice. So you're not listening to
Mm.
successful phone conversations. No, you are doing it yourself. So you're practicing, 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 and then you're listening back to your own conversation. So we're always listening back to our own conversation, and learn to critique our conversations, and then always little challenges to keep your motivation going. At some point we had like we crowned every month the person who had the most appointments in that month, and we had a whole ceremony where like we were kneeling in front of each other and stuff like that, and that really made you not want to lose.
Mm.
So yeah,
uh,
I think really that's how you learn to keep it playful, but be very deliberate about it, to sum it
mm.
up, I think.
Yeah, I think this is a great point where we can, finish up the recording. Do you have any final words? And where can people find you online, Ramses?
So people can find me online on Twitter mostly. So my handle is RR Out, and I'm sure you will put a link somewhere.
Absolutely.
And on my personal blog, Ramses.blog, where I write irregularly. And they can sign up there for my Sunday school newsletters. So I have a newsletter, bi-weekly newsletter that I send out about essentially learning skills. So very wide ranging, anything that has to do with note taking to flashcards to mindsets. I cover it all. And yeah, what else to say? It's learning. Yeah, you asked me at the beginning. So what? How or you said this is a meta skill, and I really want to hammer it to hammer it home that, yeah, learning is a meta skill. And I believe that if you know how to learn, if you get to love the learning process, anything is possible in the information age, especially if you're a knowledge worker, if you're a digital worker, anything is possible as long as you put in the time and effort.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen to that for sure. Oh man, this was so great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for the conversation.
Thanks so much for listening. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or Spotify, and share the episode with someone you know. It would really help me out a ton. New podcasts coming out every Monday. See you next week.